the past 5 days or so, I have been having an absolute blast reading Ender's Game. I took a break from reading the long, the boring, the sluggish Lord of the Rings to read the much more better paced, much more impactful, much more engaging Ender's Game, and I was not disappointed. This is the first time I've read the book in like 15 years, right? I read it back 2008, 2007, something like that. Read it for the first time, enjoyed it so much I read the second and third books as well. And I believe I might have read some of the other books in the continuity. Like it's weird. Like you have like the direct sequels, and then you have like that weird spin-off thing about how Peter Wiggin took over the world or something, and Bean is suddenly a relevant character. Never given it. I've never cared about Bean. So like yeah, always liked the books, always have, but I think at the time I read them so much that I kind of got burned out on them, and I never really came back to them. And coming back to it after such a long hiatus, it's exactly how I remember it, right? Really engaging, really interesting, like great character writing, fantastic, uh, fantastic sense of progression, interesting concepts. I do have issues with like the battles kind of being unexplained. They just kind of happen. The characters, the story is more focused on like Ender's mind state, and it's just I don't know, man. Like I think you could have done a little bit more with like the battle sequences because it's such a unique idea, and they could have he could have made it so much interesting, so interesting. But yeah, the ending is kind of rushed, honestly. Like it feels like everything after the battle school is kind of weirdly paced. Like, did he really have to go on the vacation and then come back and then win the war? Like, it just feels like very sudden. I've always kind of felt that way. But like, yeah, overall, like very, very pleased with it in general. And one of the things that makes me realize that like this is a great book is like picking up on like some of the things that you didn't really take notice of or care about the first time through, right? Like you do have like a wider range of knowledge of the world and like political situations and the time frame in which this was written. Like, because I was told by my idiot teachers that this was written like before Pac-Man, which apparently is not actually true. But it was before Pac-Man, in spite of Pac-Man being explicitly referenced in the text. It was so stupid. But like, I specifically pointed that out. Like it was so like blatantly like again, low IQ teacher. But anyway, I was I was like thinking about some of the things that stuck out to me about this book this time through with like more of a perspective. And yeah, like there wasn't a whole lot, honestly. Like, my opinion on the book and the characters remains unchanged, in regards to like how intelligent they are and how like again, like I like that. Like how it emphasizes how the characters are like capable of so much and doing so many things and how they're like disciplined to do certain things. Like again, this might be the most red-pilled book I read in school. I can't think of anything more red pill than it. Like, I don't know, maybe Call of the Wild comes close. To Kill a Mockingbird is not based, but like again, I can't really remember anything else. This might be the best book I read in school. So again, that's really really interesting. But my thing reading this, the thing that really got my attention, being introduced to Valentine again and like having the whole like conversation with Peter about like the internet and their like evil scheme to take over the world, right? Like it's interesting because it's kind of the double-edged sword of science fiction, right? Where you can clearly see where the technology is going. You clearly can see how it might be utilized, but then the reality of it is way different than you would ever expect. So with Demosthenes and Locke, right? The personas that Valentine and Peter use to go on the internet and like post their ideas online on the big wide internet, referred to as the nets in this universe. Like I get like before the internet, right? They basically the author Orson Scott Card essentially predicted the internet, online political discourse. And in his vision of the future, because Demosthenes and Locke were so so articulate, so intelligent, so insightful, they were able to quickly amass a following in a couple of years to the point where real world political leaders were seeking them out for insights and discourse and like being invited onto panels and making money and like first couple of like again, this is very very interesting because it sounds plausible to a modern viewer, but also you have like the real issues, right, that come with this kind of like dangerous political discourse, right? Because it's explicitly stated that like the Demosthenes character is deliberately like very antagonistic towards like the political majority and stuff like that. That like the character has all these really hot take positions like in regards to like, oh, the Russians are coming to get us or something. Like again, it's not explicitly stated what the positions are exactly, but they're supposedly really controversial. I imagine like current year like equivalent would be like kind of the Trump thing, right? Where you just have all these hot take opinions about like what's going on and like people support you because it feels like you're addressing the problems that the politicians in power are like deliberately not acknowledging for whatever reason. Like it feels very similar to that. But again, like when it comes to those kind of issues, when it comes to those kind of hot button political issues, the stuff that the government specifically does not want people to address, right? What do? They censor people, they deplatform people, they come after people, they try to discredit people. Like Orson Scott Card seems to have this very 80s mindset when it comes to like political discourse in America because he seemed at the time to believe that democracy was a real thing, that people were actually having like real political debates, that any of that actually mattered, and like instead of like a handful of people like controlling everything, that is becoming more and more apparent every year, right? Like again, it's kind of like a naive view of how this works, right? Like uh, the masses fundamentally have no power. It doesn't matter what they think or what they do or what they believe or whether they're being manipulated by a couple of kids. Like what the masses what the masses believe do not matter. Who they vote for does not matter because the the establishment is always going to do whatever they're going to do regardless. They're just going to have to all they have to do is just justify it to the masses. And again, I feel like the Peter Wiggin character is interesting because he comes very close to being based in this sense, where he's just like, yeah, I'm a super genius. I'm gonna take over the world because I know that I'm smarter than the adults and I can do all this stuff. Okay, but like to me, it just doesn't seem like he's willing to acknowledge the actual problems, right? Like the fact that he genuinely seems to think this is going to work. This idea that he's actually going to like manipulate world events. It's again, it sounds implausible to me because we recently we saw like the meteoric rise of Nick Rekieta, right? We saw this guy rise from relative obscurity to like being one of the biggest YouTubers on the planet, right? The Law panel show, he was highly influential, highly respected. People went to him for advice. Like he was everything that like the Locke and Demosthenes characters were supposed to be, right? Right. But again, like what happened, right? He fell off. Well, not only did he fall off, like uh he never really grew past that platform, right? There was a big barrier of entry between what he was doing and what the real political commentators were doing, right? Nothing Nick Rekieta did mattered at all, even though he desperately tried to keep up the illusion, like, oh, Crunchyroll totally shut down because of me, guys. Like, again, uh, I I really feel as if like the Demosthenes character was as as um as influential and as dangerous as like the story likes to present it, like the government would have cracked down on it a lot sooner instead of like doing what they did in the book, like, oh, it doesn't matter, they're just a couple of kids, we can use them for our own purposes. No, like they wouldn't do that. They would shut that down immediately if they saw it as a threat. The fact that they don't see like the kid that they rejected from their elite battle school for being too violent and compulsive as a legit threat to them is like insane to me. Like it doesn't make any sense at all. Like I don't know. Like it's like they really tried to make the kid characters look smarter than they are by making every adult in the room look like a drooling retard. Like again, it's embarrassing, but again, like the plan makes no sense. Do you really need a kid to do that? But anyway, again, nitpicking. I love the book, but like, yeah. Again, it's a really interesting thing to think about, like how this would play out realistically, how it's technically possible, how it comes off as plausible. But again, when you really think about the implications, like how exactly would using their father's access code to the net stop them from being tracked? Like again, like anybody who's seriously going to look into their identities is going to find them, and they do, but they just do nothing for it's interesting to think about in this regard, and I do think that's something we need to talk about going forward when it comes to like discussing real political change. Is like the fact that anything like that would actually result in anything positive would be shut down, right? And I do think that is the reoccurring thing we've been seeing over the past couple of years, especially, is that like anything that would result in a real positive change that would actually help people, that would actually do something, it's immediately shut down, like immediately. It's not even really considered. It's not even really talked about, what really needs to be done. And um that is like the big radical change that I think really needs to transpire over the next several years. Like, Peter Wiggin is right. Like the establishment leaders are drooling idiots. They would get outperformed by a 12-year-old kid, right? Like that's how low of an opinion I have of them at this point. And this is something that we really do need to address, is that like these people do not have the capacity to lead or control things as they do. And as a result of that, the general population needs to defang them and discredit them. They should not have the amount of power that they do.